Hello and welcome back to the How the Race Was Won podcast. I'm Dane Cash, and I am joined as ever this week by bike racing analyst extraordinaire and apparently international jet setter, Cosmo Catalano. Our positions, our locations are switched from where they were a few weeks ago.
We totally switched it around. I'm in Paris, which never happens. I like to stay at my house in front of my computer where I have all my stuff and I can speak the language and I know when there's going to be gluten in the food.
I want the listeners to know that you brought a light with you so that when you made the video, like, it would be a little bit brighter, and that's dedication.
Yeah, well, it's not a very big light. It fits in my backpack nicely. I kind of have been kicking around the idea of better lights for in front of the computer, but one invoice to Kaylee at a time.
Well, you were also pointing out that your location right now, like within the place that you're staying, if it were a little bit later in the day, we might be able to see the Senate building.
Yeah, I think that's what it said when I got off at the subway. Yeah, you could see it, but you wouldn't be able to see me because it would just be light.
Yeah,
and then it would be...
yeah. In any case, I hope you're enjoying your little trip. It sounds quite lovely to get a little getaway. We are here this week mostly to talk about the Tour de Romandie, which is a French-speaking race, although not really in France. I mean, they could see France, I think, at points during this race because they were in the Alps. The Tour of French-speaking Switzerland is what that is. We're going to talk mostly about that.
You know what they should do? They should just call it West Switzerland so people know where it is instead of naming it after the little pseudo-country that it used to be. I think there's a nice regional flavor to it, too. It's just confusing to people who aren't literally from Switzerland or the part of France that's next to Switzerland.
The funny thing about when they do stuff like that is that when the one that's named West, whatever, becomes like more well-known than the OG one, which is true of my home. I'm from the state of Virginia. And I feel like everywhere people know more about West Virginia for better or worse. And they think that it's like an East Virginia, West Virginia situation because it's, which I guess makes sense because there's a North and a South Carolina. Anyway, we're getting way off topic of bike racing, but that's fine because, this is we're just having some fun.
It's the quiet point in the season too. This is a very unique time of year for pro road racing, and there's Romandie, and Tour of Turkey is a big race. It's been going on forever, but it's like maybe as I'll touch on later, it's definitely there isn't a lot competing with Romandie. But I did see a very entertaining women's team time trial yesterday, though. So.
That's true. We do have the other big thing going on right now is the women's Vuelta. We'll talk a little bit about that as well. We'll leave most of that to We'll talk a little bit about the women's Vuelta, which, as of recording time, we only had one stage since the race started.
We still haven't finished Turkey.
It's
happening right now.
And then we will also close things out a little bit with a bit of a look at the Giro route. I think we're going to try to share the analysis of the pre-race analysis of the Giro with placeholders. So I think we'll talk a little bit about the route. Giro, of course, men's Giro specifically, coming up here on the 4th of May, so not that far away either. But yeah, mostly we're going to talk about Romandie, which had quite a few, I thought, very interesting stages. The final result of the race was, I think, probably a little bit surprising to some people, but it probably shouldn't have been. I thought some of the stage battles were really great. I mean, as a 1 week stage race goes, I thought it did its job. It was entertaining. It gave us sort of mini Grand Tour racing. Yeah.
It's not even a week. It's not
6
even
days.
a week.
That's right.
And it was, I completely agree. I thought it delivered all the goods in a nice tight package with good bike race things. Should we? Are we doing a rundown?
Real quick, before we tell anybody how this race is won, I'll just remind our listeners that if they haven't already, they should head on over to escapecollective.com/join, sign up, and support this podcast, Placeholders, Wheel Talk, Geek Warning, Performance Process, Overnight Success, the Tangents Podcast. We got all kinds of shows. It's a very exciting, audio club to be a part of. And also, there's a whole website, which is pretty great. Oh, I didn't even mention, we got a new show from Jack Haig, The Rest Day.
Yes.
Very exciting. So head on over to escapecollective.com/join if you haven't already. And if you have, we appreciate you. All right, Tour de Romandie. We are in stage racing mode, and I think this is. We are.
I mean, we are.
I am. I'm in it. We're in stage racing mode. This is a race for those who are pretty serious about bike racing, because I think it's one that maybe your non-bike racing friends won't have heard much about. But as we've kind of hinted at, I thought it was a great race, and it's one that rewards those who are serious enough to watch it. What's the headline first? Ineos
is back.
I love that, because I think that's actually, I wrote in the run sheet, hello again, Team Sky. Which is, so I concur. All right, well, with that, to set the scene, and maybe just we'll set the very top level thing here is that Carlos Rodriguez won the race. How was it won?
Well, he managed to not lose it on the first day. There was a very short time trial done on road bikes.
2.3K.
Yeah, I mean, and a twisty too. I think the 90-degree turns per kilometer was pretty unmatched.
A skill set that you don't often see rewarded with a stage win. I mean, but first of all, you don't get 2.3K stages.
Maybe we should, more often.
Michael Zilliard really showed off his knack for doing these things. Although Cameron Scott came quite close.
Oh, you know who else came close though?
A rider we haven't talked about that much lately. Yeah.
Stage one, Zilliard was basically dropped like immediately. He actually finished 17 minutes down in the last group on the road, a group that included Brandon McNulty, who we'll talk to later. But Dorian Godin of Decathlon won the sprint over his teammate. I shouldn't say over his teammate, because I think they were pretty clearly working together. But Dorian Godin took the sprint, and Andrea Vendrame, I'm too Frenched out.
Yeah, now. I was gonna say. I mean, he's Italian, but in Paris,
Andrea Vendrame.
Say that. Yeah.
I think would be how you'd say it. But he was second. Stage two, there was an uphill finish and a Cat 2 climb. The typical kind of break chase situation. The group had 3 minutes at the bottom of the climb and a scant couple of seconds by the end. In fact, so scant that two riders, Luke Plapp and the Bora guy,
Florian Lipovitz,
who everyone was surprised to see because they were. His teammate, Vlasov, was very well placed, but also they both look super strong. Anyway, Plapp and Lipovitz bridged across, only to have Sven Nys very cleverly take the win at the top of this Cat 2 climb.
Real quick.
Not Sven.
Yeah,
Thibaut.
Yeah, just a quick correction. But they're related, for those who don't know.
Yes. Yeah. The Thibaut is the little one, the son of Sven Nys.
The child of. He's not very little, but yes.
I mean, are people going to know Sven Nys? Just like off the top of their head?
Surely they'll know.
The great cyclocross racer and cyclocross advocate.
Being pretty serious about bike racing as our listeners are, I would think that they would know about Sven Nys. But I don't know, maybe not. Anyway, this is Thibaut's first World Tour win. So good for him for taking that. I mean, he's been a sort of a talked about prospect for quite some time. He was under 23 Euro road champ. Yeah.
And I personally have enjoyed watching his development because he obviously comes in quite heralded, as Dane might say.
Yes.
But he hasn't been sort of overdriven. He shows up, he has his peaks, he performs very well on his peaks, wins World Cups in cyclocross, pops out snagging his first World Tour race today. But it's not like they're trying to get him out to win every single race, every single time.
It's a measured development.
Yeah, which is, I think, there are a lot of really young riders who are riding really well right now. And I don't know that all of them are getting the same kind of carefully crafted development. Maybe just being told to ride as fast as they can, as often as they can. And it will be interesting to see as the years pass how that works out, how those different approaches work out.
And to be fair, I mean, that approach has worked quite well for some of these young riders. But I would guess, I don't know this, but I would guess the likelihood of burnout is lower. You know, the chance of success to me, I would think would be greater if you're going to be a little bit more careful about the development. And his, as you point out, it's been gradual. He's 21 years old. And only just now won his first World Tour race, which sounds silly to say, but when you look at some of these other prospects, including riders in this race, we're talking about guys who, they showed off how good they were quite early, and immediately were kind of thrown into the fire of World Tour racing. And so, anyway, he did finally take that first win, though.
What is also interesting is that second place at the top of this Cat 2 climb was Andrea Vendrame from second place on the road sprint the day earlier.
I think I want to not to derail you too much for telling us how basically how the GC was won, but I'll just to the listeners, we'll come back to decathlon because I want to talk a little bit about some of these stages and how decathlon did so well here. Anyway, continue.
Or as one of the Lotto Destiny riders called them, AG Desert. Actually, I think they said AG2R, which is even more
it's
amazing.
still in the name, right? So.
Yes, yeah. Well, it's just old habits are hard to break.
Yeah.
Stage 3, you may remember McNulty finishing 17 seconds down on stage 1. He also didn't finish that well on stage 2. But the good news is that when there's a time trial like you had on stage 3, you start earlier, in this case on dry pavement. We saw Magnus Sheffield also. He was second, also starting on dry pavement.
American.
American. Yeah, but it's more the I'm trying to get the picture of the race here so that we get into the rain and we know that Juan Ayuso, who was 4th overall, actually probably had a really good performance, all things considered. Also of note, he's McNulty's teammate, so you actually ended up with UAE coming in 1st, 3rd, and 4th on the day.
Yeah, with Großschartner in 3rd.
Felix.
I mean, I would say Felix, but I'm not. I'm not an Austrian person, so
he probably says Felix. Because
if there's any German-speaking listeners out there, please feel free to let us know in Discord. Brandon McNulty taking that time trial win showed that he clearly had some kind of form for this race, and obviously UAE had all this talent at this race. And then on stage 4, what happened?
We saw Ineos things. They really kind of dominated the climb or dominated most of the chase. You guys saw one, Egan Bernal, dropping the group to about 7 riders with 3.2K to go up a, I believe, first category climb. And then from that group, we saw the previously mentioned Lipovitz attack actually dropping Vlasov. And then Carapaz went with him. Rodriguez, in relatively unsky fashion, kind of waited for this to happen and then ground his way back up. So you didn't have that full Team Sky destroys everybody in the last Team Sky guy attacks. About 2.2K to go, Carapaz sort of realized that it might be hard for Lipovitz to do too much chasing because Vlasov was still better placed than him in GC. Lipovitz does not have an amazing time trial. Didn't have a horrible collapse, but lost some time. So Vlasov was better placed in GC. Carapaz goes. Obviously, Lipovitz probably can't go with him. Rodriguez is ahead of Lipovitz on the GC, so he's not super motivated to chase Carapaz. But inside the final few hundred meters, Lipovitz clearly gets taken off the leash, attacks, closes to Carapaz, can't pass him at the line. They both gain about 10 seconds over Rodriguez. And in the final GC accounting, you ended up with Carlos Rodriguez at the top of the GC with Vlasov, 7 seconds down? So you kind of have to wonder. I don't mean you don't have to wonder. Vlasov wasn't in the group, didn't have a shot at the stage win, wasn't going to lose any time, kind of regardless of what Lipovitz did, because when he attacked, he got immediate space over Rodriguez. Maybe there's some internal motivation on Rodriguez's part, having a guy he can look at to try and chase, but I wouldn't say that he impeded Vlasov's GC chances. But yeah, it was reminiscent of the Team Sky days, seeing Ineos kind of take over the leadership of the peloton and deliver a guy to the top of the GC.
We also saw, it was interesting that Egan Bernal was sort of the one doing a lot of the grinding down so that his teammate could then win. But we did see, there was a brief moment where Rodriguez appeared to hit the front of the chasing group, even though Bernal was out front. That was strange. It obviously worked out just fine in the end. They won the race, but it was a little weird to see. And then that was it for the GC. Carlos Rodriguez took his 7-second lead over Vlasov and 9 seconds over Lipovitz into the final stage, and then held up.
It was a rainy, miserable day. It wasn't a particularly challenging parkour. I think from the gun, pretty much everybody knew that surviving with the GC intact was probably going to be the rule of the day. I think we did see Bernal at one point go over a railing on one of the descents. It was an Ineos rider. I couldn't entirely pick him out, but it looked like Bernal's number. And then, Dorian Godin with the wet sprint in the rain, convincingly kind of taking the W for the last day.
Yeah, we're recording like the day after the day after the race for you, the day of the race for me. We haven't been able to verify this yet. So maybe we'll see in the next couple hours.
Yeah.
But it seemed like you were saying you saw a number that looked like his. Maybe crashed, maybe did, but the weather was bad. Is the moral of the story?
Yeah, and it was bad in a way that nobody wants to ride a bike.
Except Dorian Godon.
Well, yeah, you get that. The sprinters get that line in sight, and they find the motivation,
and thus he won 2 stages. Just got to point out that I doubt people had it on their bingo cards that Dorian Godon was going to have 2 World Tour wins before Wout van Aert got any this year.
It's true.
Yeah.
On the whole, like as I mentioned in the intro, like this is a really good way to do stage racing. It's quick. There were 2 pretty obvious GC potential days. There wasn't a lot of like seeing the same GC stage after stage. The GC lead changed a lot. A lot of different factors impacted it. And it's just a nice, tight package. Like, I get routinely flamed for this by saying the Grand Tours are too long, but it's a big ask to get someone who is partially into cycling to watch 21 days of bike racing and remember what happened, day to day. What if they miss 3 days? Like, they come back and everything's the same. That's kind of, I guess that's easier to follow, but it's not that interesting. They come back and everything's different and they have to go back and figure out what happened.
Yeah.
So 6 days, pretty straightforward.
I think you're right about different leaders. I think only the last day was there was a different, this race ended every day with a new leader, different leader every day until the last day where Rodriguez held on. All right, let's maybe talk about some of the takeaways from this race because I think there are a few. The big talking point, I think I have it in the run sheet. We're going to talk Decathlon, but let's just flip this because I want to talk Sky, the Sky Ineos vibes. We did see on stage 4, Egan Bernal at the front. I thought it was kind of ironic that at one point he was hammering Juan Ayuso, who came into this race at the head of a team that looked like Murderer's Row of that's a baseball reference of talent. They had Yates, they had him, they had McNulty, and there were like no UAE guys to be found. Poor Juan Ayuso was very isolated in that group, and meanwhile, Egan Bernal and Carlos Rodriguez both there. And I thought it was a little bit ironic also that when Bernal put in the big dig, some of the folks that were sort of tasked with trying to chase him were former, Sky guys, like Sivakov, for instance.
There are a lot of former Sky guys.
That is true. But Sivakov is one of those UAE guys that just, wasn't able to really, chase him down. And so what we saw was Ineos going in knowing, I guess feeling like they had the advantage on the climbs, and the best way to win this race was to just hammer it and put Ayuso under pressure. They did exactly that. And so many times in the past 4 years, we've seen them do that because it's like they didn't know what else to do, even when they didn't have the best guy. But they did this time. I think they knew that they did, and it actually kind of worked out. So for once, I think people get kind of bored with the way that they do this. But I was kind of glad to see the old Sky train doing its thing.
And in its 6-day road race, if they do it convincingly on one stage, they did it a little bit on stage 2, but not really. Like, if it happens once, you're kind of like, oh, cool. Like, they dominated today. Great performance by the team. When it happens on, every single mountain stage, you're like, and this sort of gets down to a sporting versus like entertainment question, right? Because obviously the strongest team in the race is going to try and win the race when they feel strong. And whether that's the same thing they did 2 days ago or whether that's just a one-off that's super entertaining to see is not really... They don't care about that. They care about being strong and executing. Yeah.
Yep. And the other great thing, and I keep saying every time we talk about him, I love seeing Egan Bernal doing these things, looking good, and he looked really good on that climb in teammate mode because he was riding for Rodriguez, but he ended up being really strong. I mean, and it's not the first time we've seen that in the past few months. He was great at Catalunya. We saw him at Liège. I mean, he's clearly back to some semblance of form, and that's pretty awesome to see. He finished 10th overall. And then I do want to talk about the winner himself, Carlos Rodriguez, who shouldn't be a surprising winner. It's funny. I think he has somehow managed to fly under the radar because of, I think, a couple of things. Well, first of all, I think because of how dominant Jonas Vingegaard and Tadej Pogačar have been. Anybody else who is a Grand Tour type just sort of feels like an also-ran. And I think people therefore don't really... I think a lot of people don't even know that he finished 5th at the Tour last year. Like that in most situations gets you a lot of hype if you're he's just turned 23. So he was 22 when he took that 5th at the Tour. And yet I feel like he was very much flying under the radar. I know he was flying under the radar because I managed to draft him in my fake team that we did for the placeholders a couple of months ago. And I feel like people just kind of sleep on him, on Rodriguez. Yeah, and they shouldn't.
They shouldn't. And I think a lot of it is, he doesn't have somebody steps onto an elevator with you and you got to tell them about Carlos Rodriguez, 2024 Tour of Romandie winner. What's your quick pitch for him? And he doesn't have a lot of like tremendous character attributes assigned to him the way pro cyclists sort of do these days, right? Like Vingegaard is this dude, you see him in like his big rubber gloves cutting up fish. Tadej Pogačar is this kind of jokery guy who, makes motorcycle gestures to show how fast the stage is going and is a little bit of a goofball in addition to being super dominant. Rodriguez just is, I want to say he needs an agent. He's got an agent, obviously, right? But like he needs some sort of hook, some sort of thing to get people hyped.
I think with Rodriguez, you get is someone who he's probably one big result away from that kind of.
Does he have a nickname?
Good question. I don't know.
You got to get him a nickname. Yeah. I think that's the plan.
Yeah, it definitely helps when you get a nickname, even if it's like something totally contrived and made up just to. Yeah. But I think he's close. I feel like he's close. If he gets a big victory, he'll kind of break through. But you're right. He hasn't really been meme-ified. He hasn't been.
He needs memes. He needs.
Yeah, he needs memes. Well, he just like you pointed out. I mean, he hasn't been turned into like he's not a fish factory guy. He's not a meme lord. So yeah, he needs a thing. Maybe this Romandie win will help. What he definitely is an extremely talented climber and a capable enough time trialist to be a Grand Tour contender. And that's how he landed 5th at last year's Tour. He also did win a stage, by the way, at last year's Tour de France. So he's already a Tour de France stage winner. But yeah, I think part of it, the other part of it for him, and this is kind of a bummer for him, is that he rides for a team where the expectation is that anything less than winning the Tour de France is not enough. And I think if he rode for a different team, that might also lead to him being a bit better known or known differently, more, treated more as a impressive 23-year-old. Because if you are an Ineos Grenadier who finishes 5th at the Tour, then people are like, oh man, Ineos really falling off their perch. Whereas if you ride for literally anyone else, maybe, okay, not Visma, but if you were a Cofidis rider, that's a huge achievement.
We'd never stop hearing about it.
Right. So it's part of the fact that he's at Ineos and the expectations are so damn high over there.
I do kind of wonder for fans who weren't there for Sky, do they still have that expectation of Ineos? Did they remember this team as a dominant team, or are they?
Is it starting to fade into the?
Yeah, it's really like, who are these guys? Why is everyone talking about them? Is it because they're a British team in the Anglosphere in cycling and they just?
That's also probably not helping Rodriguez either, is that he is not that. Whereas Pidcock, for instance, is. But okay, enough about why he's not famous enough. He's now won the Tour de Romandie. He's won his first big World Tour stage race. He is, by the way, planning to go to the Tour de France this year, where I sure hope he will be. I mean, I hope he wins the Tour de France because the fellow member of my fake team, Jonas Vingegaard, seems to be in some health-related trouble right now. Anyway, hats off to the whole team, Egan Bernal and Carlos Rodriguez. let's talk about decathlon, because on stage one, I was going to say the first stage, but it was the second stage, but stage one, after the prologue,
the second stage
dominated that sprint. They did just a beautiful final 300 meters, basically. And that's just not something you say about decathlon very often. That's just not a team that we see doing that. The funny thing is, they went out this year and they signed Sam Bennett, and they decided they were going to start being a good sprint team. And I remember I wrote the story for Escape in November when this news was unveiled. And I remember that the headline, I made kind of a sort of a funny little, I thought it was funny, dig at the team by saying this is the headline for the Sam Bennett story. Sam Bennett is headed to noted sprint powerhouse ... Decathlon AG2R Le Mondial, which now looking back, it's like, well, they just won a sprint. They went 1-2 on stage one without Sam Bennett. So clearly they have decided to become a sprint powerhouse, at least in the Tour de Romandie level stages, races. But yeah, I think, first of all, if you go back and watch, if you have a chance, and there's highlights, by the way, that you can see on YouTube. I think a couple of different broadcasters have different highlights up. You'll see a lot of chaos in that last 10K or so. Alaphilippe tried to attack. Jan Tratnik went off the front. There were a couple of guys. Andreas Krohn, Gamper. And then things kind of came back together. Trek, Alpecin, Visma all tried to do lead outs. And I think Decathlon, the way that they took control in the last 300 meters, to me looked very much like a team that's been there, done that. And that's not what I think of when I think of Decathlon. But they came to the front at the perfect time. If it had come a little bit earlier, then they probably wouldn't have been in the position where they were. But they came at the perfect time where they had two guys who were fresh. And I don't really know what their plan was going in, but their two guys were so fresh and so fast and so well placed that they did go 1-2. Vendrame, sort of celebrated as Godin crossed the line in front of him because they went 1-2. And then they showed on the final stage with Dorian Godin winning ahead of Simone Consone. Again, not a fluke. This decathlon team, I mean, they are here to race, and they're outperforming, I think, several recent editions of AG2R where we just haven't seen that much from them. Yeah.
I'm always a little, Romandie is not known for being a sprinter's paradise, although I will say this was one of the more sprinter friendly courses they've had, in the sense that there were two pretty obvious sprinters days. But yeah, no, I definitely agree with the kind of assessment, and it's interesting to note too. They were 1-2 in the points competition at the end of the stage race, because they had Andrame second place on the first two stages, and in fact had the jersey all through the race and lost it to go down on the last day.
His own teammate. Yeah.
Well, lost in quotation marks. I think if you had said, "Hey, we can have you win the points jersey for the overall, or we can have Godin take another stage in the final stage," Andrame would tell you that is the Godin win is the correct option. So.
And Godin gets the jersey too as part of it. So,
it's not like it leaves the team. So.
Right. Vendrame will be racing the upcoming Giro d'Italia, by the way, where I would think he could be in contention for some of those punchier stages. We'll get to that in a bit. Maybe some last thoughts from Romandie. I wanted to give some credit to Lipowitz, because I think that's a rider first of all, I don't think people are going to be that familiar with his name. He's not someone who has had really any major, huge results to speak of at the sort of highest level. He did win the Czech Tour last year. He was up there at last year's Tour of Turkey, but I think you have to be a very serious bike racing fan to follow that. So if you're just pretty serious, you might actually not have heard of Florian Lipowitz. And again, some of the tactics may be a little bit questionable with Vlasov in the team. I was actually just very pleased to see both him and Luke Plapp, hats off to Luke Plapp, for what I thought was a really savvy, low-risk move on stage 2, where both of them bridged up to that surviving duo of breakaway riders. It was Ness and Vendrame. To me, it was, why not try to bridge up to them? Because yeah, you might not get that much time, but they got a couple of seconds out of it. And Plapp, it didn't really do much for his. I mean, Plapp's GC bid promptly fell apart, but it was still the right thing to do. And for Lipovitz, he got some time out of it and ended up finishing on the GC podium.
And I mean, Luke Plapp is the sort of rider that when he makes these moves, he doesn't make them idly. Like, he's extremely strong. He takes kind of lower percentage shots because he knows that's still his best chance to come away with the big result, but they're not like wasted. He does it very intentionally, and it's usually a smart move, even if it doesn't work out. And I believe he was the initiator on that bridge. And so to have Lipowitz kind of with his eyes on Plapp making that split-second decision to go, like that's a good bike racing. So,
yeah, and again, another young guy, 23, Lipovitz. Another talented young Bora guy. This is a team that has done a really good job of,
Red Bull?
Yes, the Red Bull
Red
squad.
Bull coming in?
I mean, they've done a really nice job of identifying young talents. Unfortunately, they've also managed to let some of them go. In Kianuta Brooks is one that I'm thinking of. But yeah, bright future ahead, I would think, for Lipovitz, who I feel like should win some kind of jersey. Because, like, other than the time trial in which he was just so-so, he was really good in this race, and he felt like, to me, the best rider, like, in general, maybe. Yeah, I mean, obviously that's not how bike racing works, but on the climbs he was consistently there. It wasn't that bad in the TT. Some kind of combination jersey, I feel like, because he was up there in the points classification and the GC, and I don't think that exists anymore. But the combination jersey should be his.
I think more kind of non-obvious awards is good. And we talked about this at the Vuelta because there were like 28 different post-stage prizes. But I think that kind of uniqueness is appealing. It gives new fans a hook to
totally agree with that.
Like, what weird result? What weird award are we going to see at the end of today's stage?
I mean, honestly, even just the basic secondary classifications, I think add a ton. I think I remember watching Amit Sharuka going for a King of the Mountains points thing at the País Vasco race like 11 years ago now, and being new to the sport, new to watching the sport, and thinking like, well, this is awesome. There's a race within a race, and obviously, I mean, that sounds so simple now. If you're a bike racing fan, of course, there's races within races. But if you're new to it, I mean, it is really cool. Anyway, all right, that's Romandie. Let's take a quick break before we talk Grand Tours. All right, the Vuelta a España Femenina. Like we said at the beginning, we have only one stage in the books so far, so you're not going to get a whole lot of analysis from us. And honestly, I'm not sure Wheel Talk's going to have too much to talk about just yet. But where are we after the opening Triple T, Cosmo?
We are closely knotted at the front of the race. It was a super interesting TT, I thought. I'm sure Abby will have more to say about it, but a team looked like they were going to win, and then they had a mishap, and then they didn't seem to know what they were going to do, and it almost looks like somebody shouted at them over the radio, win the race. But yeah, we have Gaia Realini leading the race about 0 seconds because they were fractional on the GC over Visma. And so Marianne Vos kind of right there in terms of GC time may take the lead on the next stage. We'll see. Estée Works also pretty close. And interesting to know that both the Trek and both Lidl Trek and Estée Works tried very hard to keep a not good time trialist very close to the front of the race as they did the team time trial. And
they, I think, did a pretty good job of that.
Great job on both, especially with Lidl's kind of last corner mishap.
So far, extremely close at the top. And I think it's actually going to stay that way in the GC department for a few days yet, because we're not going to get a whole lot of likely GC action until at least stage 5 and probably not until stage 6. It's stages 6 and 8 are the big climbing days. So it'll be on the last day probably where this race is decided. It's a big mountain climb near Madrid that should likely be the final decider.
This year's race has some big shoes to fill after last year, which I think was the best of the women's Grand Tours, honestly. From a racing point of view, There was a lot that happened there. I think to the point that they ended up instituting some sort of nature break zone after the feed stops.
The controversy, the polemica was very much entertaining, is what it was. So, yeah.
Catch up on last year's race.
Hopefully, we'll get something similar this year. And, plenty of star power to deliver on that with we've kind of already mentioned them, but with the likes of the entire SD Works team, but also, including Demi Vollering and Mariana Voss and Gaia Realini and Elisa Longo Borghini on Lidl Trek. Yeah, plenty of big names to contest the GC battle alone, let alone all the stage battles. We'll talk. Tuesday, we'll have a little bit more, and then I'm assuming the following Tuesday we'll have plenty more on everything that has happened and will have happened at the Vuelta Femenina. On the men's side, we also have Grand Tour season. We've got the Giro d'Italia coming up. We'll talk just a little bit about the stages, what to expect from the route this year. I'm also going to plug a story I wrote actually kind of a little while ago now about the route, because we've known the route for a little while. And I think just going back, I have a hard time describing this route any better than I already did back in October. And now that I say this, was Joe Lindsay the one who came up with this headline? It starts and ends spicy. And I think that's a good way to describe this Giro, because they do not waste time getting to the GC stuff. There's some climbing on the first stage. There's some very hard climbing on the second stage. There's gravel. There's some Tuscan gravel, which we are all familiar with from Strade Bianche in the first week. And, I'm happy because there are two individual time trials, 68-ish K in total across those two, which is for a Grand Tour in 2024, not nothing. That might seem like nothing to Miguel Indurain, but in 2024, that's not nothing. So a nice balanced Grand Tour with shorter stages than we have often seen in the past. None of this, 250K boring stuff. I think the Giro is finally getting on board with what the Tour and the Vuelta seem to have figured out. And not all that much, again, relatively, accumulated elevation gain, which I would guess would make for a closer race. I hope will make for a closer race, because I think the expectation, I have to say, for a lot of people going into this race, is that one rider, a debutante at the Giro d'Italia, no less, may destroy everyone. So I'm hoping that it will be a little bit closer than that. We will see. But yeah, the race kicks off in Turin, Torino, from today, 6 days, 7 days? So on May 4th is the first day of this race. So very soon we will officially be watching the first men's Grand Tour of the year. And of course, the Vuelta Femenina already going on. So it's a very exciting time to be a pretty serious bike racing fan. Cosmo, you got any other thoughts for the day, or are we ready to wrap it up?
No, I'm always I'm taken back to a simpler time where the Giro time trials were almost an afterthought. Like, I remember Damiano Cunego showing up in or near the lead of a Giro on a TT bike he had clearly never ridden before. Like, sort of kind of hunched onto the bike, shoulders and face up in the breeze. And this was historically, I think it just wasn't a big TT race, right? There was just sort of an understanding that this would be settled in the mountains. And now it's taken the time trials seriously, but not too seriously.
Not too serious, just pretty serious.
None of this 65K nonsense per stage.
Yeah.
I am for a race that, like you said, a lot of people are really more wondering what Tadej Pogacar's margin of victory will be than whether or not he'll win. I am still looking forward to seeing what happens at this event.
Yeah, we should say he's not the only GC rider there. He's the clear favorite, but Geraint Thomas may have something to say about it. He was second by a very slim margin last year. Timo Arendsman, Romain Bardet, plenty of other big names. But I think Pogacar is the clear favorite. So if anybody else manages to overhaul him, it will be a big story. plenty of reason to watch. And by the time we're back recording, we will have had some Giro action to talk about. Also, Eschborn-Frankfurt coming up as well.
Yes, May 1st. We're having this race on May 1st, and you cannot make us put it on a weekend. Love to see it.
Yeah, I don't really know why they decided that they were going to hold their relatively small, World Tour level, but yeah, one-day race midweek on May 1st, but whatever. More power to them. The 61st Eschborn-Frankfurt, which has often been a big race for the sprinters. I think Alexander Kristoff has won it like 18 times or something. There will be some. It's a World Tour race, so he'll be there, and Mark Hershey will be there, and plenty of World Tour riders will be there. We're probably going to talk a little bit more about the Giro, though, so plenty to look forward to there. The Vuelta will have finished as well. Also, this week, placeholders will almost certainly talk more about the Giro d'Italia, so obviously tune in for that. And we will see you again in a week. Cosmo, enjoy your vacay.
I'm enjoying it.
Yeah, great.
It's nice. There's no. My parents are watching my kid. I don't have to take the dogs in and out every 5 seconds. It's good.
Lovely. That's just delightful. Well, I'm Dane Cash, and I just said your name, so people know that you're bike racing analyst extraordinaire Cosmo Catalano. But what was this?
This was the How the Race Was Won podcast.
Oh, great. Thanks, Cosmo. And we'll see you all next week.